Racist cop hits black woman, then discovers she's his boss. Karma hit hard. Life can change in a single, heated moment. In a small city, where prejudice still lurks in dark corners, Officer Terry Cole, a hot-headed cop with a history of crossing lines, lets his temper and bias get the best of him. One ill-fated day, he strikes a woman in an altercation he believes is just another routine show of force. But unbeknownst to Terry, this particular woman wields authority he never imagined. In a dramatic twist of fate, she turns out to be his new boss, and she's coming with an iron will to clean up the department. What happens next is a collision of ego, guilt, and overdue justice. Officer Terry Cole yawned as he pulled up to the Maplewood Police Department, a small station known for keeping the peace in a town that wasn't always peaceful. The morning sun glinted off the well-worn facade, highlighting the cracked paint on the sign that read Maplewood Police, as if the building itself bore scars of a complicated history. Inside the station, the fluorescent lights hummed, bathing the reception area in an unflattering glow. Terry was not the type to apologize for his attitude. At 36, he had spent a decade in uniform, with a personal record that showed more than a few formal complaints, too many of them involving citizens who didn't look like him. He was tall, broad-shouldered, perpetually frowning, and always ready to press his advantage in any situation. Full attendance required. The notice was cryptic but official. He rolled his eyes. There was a rumor going around that a high-ranking officer from a bigger city was coming to Maplewood to take over as captain. Terry assumed it was just another bureaucrat who'd try to reel in officers' freedom under the guise of reforms. He'd been through half a dozen captains. None impressed him much. He slammed the locker shut, strapped on his Glock 19, the standard-issue sidearm for Maplewood PD, and grabbed the keys to his Ford Crown Victoria. The car was one of the last few Crown Vics still in service at Maplewood. The rest of the fleet had upgraded to newer models. Terry liked the old cruiser, though. It was a classic police car, and its battered frame suited him just fine. He was assigned to patrol the North District, an area that had recently become more diverse as new families moved in. On his best days, Terry handled the job quietly, focusing on traffic stops and petty crimes. On his worst days, he looked for excuses to prove a point. Just as he was about to head out, his partner for the day, Officer Jim Rodriguez, ambled up. Jim was a few years younger, with a calmer demeanor. "Hey, Terry, you hear about that meeting? Some new brass is coming in, right?" Terry shrugged. "Hey, I'll believe it when I see it. These big city types never stick around long anyway. They swoop in, try to fix things that ain't broke, and then realize Maplewood is tougher than it looks." Jim didn't respond. He just gave Terry a quick nod and slid into the passenger seat. Their morning started quietly. A few routine traffic stops, a call about a neighbor dispute, and a false alarm at a convenience store. By mid-morning, Terry was itching to swing by Blackwood Coffee on Redwood Avenue. He needed a caffeine jolt. The place was known to be frequented by various city officials, cops, and detectives. When they arrived, the parking lot was only half full. Inside, the smell of dark roast coffee and toasted bagels was comforting. Terry took a moment to scan the patrons. He recognized a few local workers, some old-timers, and a handful of high school kids skipping class. "Hey, can I get a large black coffee?" Terry asked the barista. He sipped from the steaming cup, feeling the welcome burn on his tongue. Jim, meanwhile, struck up a conversation with another officer who'd come in. Terry's attention drifted to the corner of the shop, where a tall, poised black woman stood fiddling with her phone. She wore a crisp navy blue blazer, black slacks, and low-heeled shoes. Something about her confident posture, or her steady, almost analytical glance made Terry briefly curious. But just as quickly, he dismissed the thought. The woman soon left the coffee shop, stepping into the late morning sunshine. Terry finished his coffee in a few quick gulps, tossed the cup into a nearby bin, and beckoned Jim. "Let's head out," he said gruffly. They drove off, eventually responding to a minor fender bender call a few blocks away. The thought of the upcoming meeting crept into Terry's mind again, and he felt an odd sensation he couldn't quite name. He hated change, especially if it came from outside. "We'll see who this new big shot is," he muttered under his breath. Had he paid closer attention, he might have noticed that the woman who'd left the coffee shop was also headed toward the Maplewood Police Department. Had he paid closer attention, he might have seen the future about to unfold in front of him, bringing forth a tidal wave of reckoning. But for now, Officer Terry Cole drove on, ignorant of the storm brewing just beyond the horizon and how it would soon arrive to test not just his career, but his very moral core. Ebony Carter stepped out of the coffee shop and took in a deep breath of Maplewood's morning air. She liked the vibe of smaller towns. After years in Chicago, one of the largest police departments in the nation, she'd learned to appreciate the calmer pace. But she also knew calmer did not mean simpler. Sometimes the most insidious problems thrived in places where people assumed life was a gentle breeze. She opened her car door, placed her coffee in the cup holder, and mentally prepared herself for her first day at Maplewood PD as the new captain. Though Ebony had visited the station only once before, she felt it important to move discreetly, to get a sense of the town, without the weight of her rank looming over every interaction. That's why she hadn't gone straight to the station at dawn, but instead spent the morning driving around, grabbing coffee and observing. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at the caller ID. It was an old friend from the Chicago PD. She let it go to voicemail, determined to stay focused. This day would undoubtedly test her resilience. She knew about the rumors. Maplewood PD was a mixed bag of community policing successes and internal controversies. Some officers had good reputations, others not so much. She intended to sort it all out. But first impressions mattered, and Ebony wanted to see Maplewood really see it before stepping into the role of Captain Carter. She started the engine of her rental car and drove toward Maplewood's north side, a part of town she'd heard had occasional racial tensions. Ebony's plan was to casually walk around, talk to a few residents, and gauge the atmosphere. She had parked near an old grocery store on Willow Street, an establishment that had been around for decades. The store was a local fixture, known for friendly service, yet overshadowed by a few complaints from newer residents about less than welcoming staff. Inside, Ebony grabbed a small basket and wandered through the aisles, picking up a few essentials: water, a sandwich for lunch, and a pack of gum. She wanted to keep her presence unassuming. Dressed in her blazer and slacks, she might have passed for a business professional or maybe a city official, but she certainly didn't appear to be the new head of Maplewood PD. As she perused the cereal aisle, she overheard raised voices by the front. Curiosity piqued, she inched closer. A flustered teenage cashier seemed to be dealing with an irate customer, a bulky man with a shaved head and tattoos on his forearms. He was demanding a refund for a product he claimed was expired. The teenager, voice trembling, tried to explain that store policy required a receipt. Normally, Ebony would let the store manager or local authorities handle a situation like this. But the manager was nowhere in sight, and the man's agitation was escalating fast. Ebony stepped closer, carefully. "Is there a problem here?" she asked calmly, her tone neutral. The man turned, eyes blazing with aggression. "And who are you?" he snarled. "A concerned customer. That's all." "Are you okay, son?" She glanced at the cashier, who nodded timidly. "Stay out of it," the man hissed. "This punk won't do his job." Ebony raised a placating hand. "Look, I'm sure if we talk this through." But before she could finish, the man shoved her aside, sending her back a step. Ebony's instincts kicked in. She stepped sideways, prepared to defend herself, but she didn't want to escalate the situation unnecessarily. She was more than capable of taking him down if needed. Ebony had extensive training from her years in Chicago and had even attended workshops at the FBI National Academy. Yet she also knew that a calm approach often diffused tension better than force. Just then, the automatic doors slid open. A uniformed officer strode in. Officer Terry Cole. Ebony recognized him from the coffee shop. He quickly assessed the situation. A large white man shouting, a black woman with no uniform, a frightened teenage cashier. Ebony glanced at Terry, relieved that backup was here, but something about Terry's eyes gave her pause. There was a flash of impatience, or maybe irritation. "Sir, step away," Terry barked at the man. Then, without waiting for a response, he turned on Ebony. "Ma'am, are you involved in this?" "Yes, but," she began. "She's interfering," the angry customer spat. "I just want a refund." Terry stepped between them, momentarily ignoring the customer's outburst. "Ma'am, I need you to leave the premises while I handle this situation." Ebony, wanting to de-escalate, nodded. "All right, officer. I'm just going to step back over here. I was only trying to. I gave you an order." Terry's voice was surprisingly hostile. Ebony, sensing the tension, tried to remain calm. She moved away, speaking in a measured tone. "Officer, I'm following your instructions." "You don't need to. I said move." Terry snapped, cutting her off. She saw his hand resting on his baton, knuckles turning white. Before Ebony could assure him she was complying, Terry's patience snapped. He reached out, grabbed Ebony's arm roughly, and attempted to yank her aside. She stumbled, and as she tried to regain her balance, the officer shoved her again, harder this time. Ebony felt a burst of pain as her shoulder hit a nearby shelf, causing several cereal boxes to tumble to the floor. Stunned, Ebony stared at Terry, her heart pounding. She had faced aggression before, but it never ceased to shock her when someone in uniform used excessive force, especially without just cause. The teenage cashier gasped in horror, and a few customers screamed. The confrontation was spiraling out of control. Terry's eyes blazed with anger, and Ebony could see the prejudice etched in his scowl. She knew exactly what this was. He saw a black woman, presumed she was just another problem, and decided to flex his authority in the most brutal way. Ebony's entire body tensed with fury and disbelief, but she forced herself to stay calm, inhaling sharply, ignoring the throbbing pain in her shoulder. "Officer," she said, her voice quivering with controlled anger, "I'm stepping back as you requested." Let's not turn this into suddenly. The man who'd been demanding the refund rushed forward, shouting at the cashier again. Terry spun to subdue him, leaving Ebony leaning against the shelf, her heart pounding. Within a minute, another patrol officer arrived, responding to the store's alarm button. That officer quickly helped restrain the angry customer. In the chaos, Ebony slipped away, knowing that staying might only inflame Terry's aggression further. As she walked out, Ebony's mind roiled with conflicting emotions, shock, anger, and a sharp disappointment. She'd come here to lead a department that was supposed to protect citizens. Instead, she'd been assaulted by one of its own. She glanced at the time. The mandatory meeting at Maplewood PD was scheduled in less than an hour. Ebony forced herself to compose her thoughts. Soon she would walk through the station's doors, not as a victim, but as the new captain. She brushed dust from her blazer, rubbed her aching shoulder, and resolved that Officer Terry Cole had just met his reckoning. He just didn't know it yet. Inside the Maplewood Police Department, a buzz of conversation filled the conference room. Officers filed in, many swapping theories about who the new captain would be and what changes might be in store. Everyone was required to attend: administrative staff, detectives, patrol officers, and even the desk sergeant who rarely left the front counter. Terry Cole walked in, still agitated. The brief scuffle at the grocery store had left him flushed with adrenaline, and he hadn't had time to process it fully. His partner, Jim Rodriguez, noticed Terry's tense posture as he took a seat near the back of the room. "You okay, man?" Jim asked quietly. "Fine," Terry grumbled, though his frown suggested otherwise. He flexed his right hand, recalling how hard he had gripped that woman's arm. Part of him felt a twinge of guilt. He knew he'd overreacted. But old habits died hard. He justified it by telling himself she might have interfered or become violent. Still, something about the incident nagged at him. The woman had not resisted. She hadn't so much as raised her voice, except to protest his unnecessary force. He glanced around and noticed Lieutenant Arlene Howe by the podium. She was adjusting a microphone, looking uncharacteristically nervous. Arlene was typically unflappable. If she was anxious, that meant the new captain was likely someone significant. At exactly noon, the conference room door swung open, and in walked Chief Kenneth Marsh, head of Maplewood PD for the last decade. Alongside him was the woman from the grocery store, the very one Terry had just shoved around. Terry's eyes widened. He sat up straight, blood rushing from his face. Chief Marsh cleared his throat, surveyed the room, and then spoke. "Thank you all for coming," he said, his usually gruff voice carrying a solemn note. "I want to introduce our new Captain Ebony Carter. She comes to us with extensive experience from the Chicago Police Department and has undergone specialized training at the FBI National Academy. We're fortunate to have her." A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. Ebony Carter stood poised, shoulders back, surveying the department she was about to lead. Her gaze swept over the rows of officers, eventually settling on Terry. For a moment, their eyes locked. Terry felt his stomach drop. He realized with mounting dread that the woman he had manhandled was not just any bystander, but the new commanding officer. Chief Marsh stepped aside, and Ebony took the podium. "Thank you, Chief, for the introduction," she began, her voice strong and clear. "And thank you to everyone here at Maplewood PD for the warm welcome. I'm looking forward to working with all of you to ensure we serve our community effectively and ethically." Terry swallowed hard, suddenly noticing the bruise forming on Ebony's right shoulder, faint but visible. Guilt seeped into him, intermingling with a rising sense of fear for the consequences. "We'll focus on community outreach, improved training and accountability. As we move forward, I want you all to know my door is open. We're in this together." After Ebony's remarks, Chief Marsh invited a few questions. Most queries were about administrative matters, scheduling changes, departmental structure, upcoming community programs. His heart pounded as he remembered the moment he had shoved her into the shelf. Did she plan to report him? Was he about to be suspended or worse? Lieutenant Howe approached Ebony first. They exchanged a few words, their tones low and serious. Then Howe stepped back, allowing Ebony some space. Steeling himself, Terry moved forward, ignoring Jim's whispered, "Dude, be careful." Up close, the bruise on her shoulder was more noticeable, and Terry had to force himself not to stare. "Officer Cole," she replied. "Pleased to meet you." "Was there a misunderstanding, officer?" she asked quietly, her voice tinged with restrained anger. "From my perspective, you used excessive force on a citizen, attempting to de-escalate a confrontation. Do you see it differently?" His mouth went dry. He realized there was no denying what had happened. I acted on instinct. That situation was chaotic, and Ebony cut him off with a curt nod. "We'll discuss it later, in detail." But inside, his mind churned with worry. Ebony Carter was not only the new captain, she was also his victim, someone with the authority to discipline or even fire him. As he left the conference room, images from the grocery store replayed in his head. Ebony's wide eyes as he grabbed her arm, the shelf rattling when she collided with it, the look of shock on bystanders' faces. In the hallway, he punched a nearby wall in frustration. earning a few startled looks from administrative staff. He needed to figure out a plan, a way to mitigate the fallout. He considered going to the police union representative, or maybe he'd craft a story that Ebony had attacked him first. But that was a dangerous lie. There might be store footage, witnesses. She sank into the chair, rolling her shoulders to ease the lingering ache. The bruise from Terry's shove throbbed, a physical reminder of the hostility she'd encountered on day one. She wanted to focus on Maplewood PD's organizational charts, budgets, and crime statistics. But her thoughts kept drifting back to her altercation with Terry Cole. It was surreal. She'd been assaulted by a uniformed officer before even setting foot in the department in an official capacity. Now, that same officer was under her command. "I'd like to file a formal report regarding an incident that occurred earlier today." A brief pause followed. Then Lee responded, "Of course, Captain. Please, fill me in." Ebony explained the events at the grocery store, how she intervened in a confrontation, how Officer Cole arrived, and how he escalated the situation by using excessive force on her. She also knew that, as a direct victim, she'd need to be recused from the investigative chain of command. "Understood, Captain," Lee said, voice steady. "We'll gather statements and any available footage. We'll keep you updated." After hanging up, Ebony sat back, exhaling slowly. Reporting one of her own officers on day one wasn't how she'd hoped to start. She'd wanted to build trust, but she couldn't let such an egregious act slide. If anything, this would set a precedent. Ebony Carter would not tolerate abuse of power. She glanced at the clock. Another meeting was scheduled in 10 minutes this time with Chief Marsh to discuss departmental reforms. Ebony stood, straightened her blazer, and headed toward the chief's office. On her way, she passed by a cluster of detectives talking in hushed tones. They fell silent as she walked by, shooting her curious, guarded glances. She kept her chin high. Chief Marsh's office was larger than hers, with a commanding view of the station's main entrance. Marsh, a portly man with white hair and a lined face, waved her in. "Captain Carter, come in. Have a seat." Ebony sat, her posture formal. Marsh folded his hands on the desk, studying her face. "So, how's your first day going?" he asked, a note of awkward humor in his voice. She forced a small smile. "Eventful," she said, not elaborating. Marsh nodded gravely. "I heard about the incident at the grocery store. I also heard internal affairs is now involved. Word travels fast in a small department." Ebony kept her expression steady. "Yes, sir. I filed a report. Officer Cole used unwarranted force. I felt it necessary to follow protocol." Marsh leaned back in his chair, sighing. "I understand. Cole's been a handful for a while now, complaints, rumors. Yet, he's always managed to skirt major discipline. Our union is strong, and his record, while spotty, hasn't led to a formal charge yet." Ebony's eyebrow arched. "That may change. Perhaps," Marsh said. "But let's not let this overshadow our main agenda. We need to discuss the broader reforms you plan to implement. You were brought in precisely because of your experience handling complex situations in Chicago. Maplewood might be smaller, but the challenges are real." Ebony nodded, grateful for the shift in conversation. They spent the next half hour talking about strategies, expanding community policing programs, increasing accountability through body cameras, diversifying hiring practices, and establishing stronger mental health support for officers. Marsh seemed open to her ideas, though Ebony couldn't gauge if he would fully back them when push came to shove. As she was leaving, Marsh gave her a pointed look. "About Cole, just be prepared for blowback. He has allies here. Some people think he's just doing his job. Others might see this as a chance to push him out. It could divide the department." Ebony held the chief's gaze. "I won't back down from what's right, sir, but I'll try to handle it with fairness and professionalism." A flicker of approval crossed Marsh's features. I expect nothing less. Good luck, Captain. Meanwhile, Terry paced the hallway outside. He'd just received a call from a friend who said Ebony had contacted Internal Affairs. The pit in his stomach deepened. He knew there was a decent chance store security cameras had captured the entire incident. He was no stranger to disciplinary hearings, but this time was different. His victim was the new captain, which put him in a precarious position, panic-warred with anger. Terry found himself replaying memories he'd spent years trying to justify an offhand racist comment here, a rough arrest there. Maybe the day of reckoning was finally at hand. Still, he clung to the idea that Maplewood PD was tight-knit and typically backed its own. He hoped that might save him. Yet he couldn't shake the image of Ebony Carter's steady, unafraid eyes looking straight at him in the conference room. She was no rookie, no pushover. Somehow, he sensed that the usual half-truths and backdoor deals wouldn't fly under her leadership. As Ebony returned from Marsh's office, Terry saw her in the corridor. Their eyes met briefly before she turned away, heading toward her own office. He stood there, conflicted, as an uneasy sense of doom took root. Officer Terry Cole was about to learn, perhaps for the first time in his life, that actions had consequences, especially when the target of one's brutality is the very person now holding the reins of power. Later that afternoon, Ebony closed the blinds in her office, allowing herself a moment of solitude. She slipped off her blazer and gently touched the bruise on her shoulder. The pain was a dull throb now, but it served as an ugly reminder. She'd made her IA report, she'd spoken with Chief Marsh, and she'd introduced herself to most of the department. Yet the day felt like an emotional marathon. Her thoughts drifted back to Chicago. She recalled long nights patrolling neighborhoods plagued by gun violence, forging alliances with local community leaders, and investigating corrupt officers. She had joined the Chicago Police Department fresh out of the academy, fueled by a desire to protect the vulnerable people who looked like her, people who often felt the system was stacked against them. Early in her career, Ebony had encountered officers not unlike Terry Cole. Some were openly hostile, others quietly resentful that a black woman was moving up the ranks. But Ebony's competence and calm demeanor eventually earned her respect. She had cracked several high-profile cases, including one that involved police misconduct in a district riddled with corruption. It was that investigation that brought her to the attention of the FBI's Civil Rights Division, leading to an invite to the FBI National Academy. She accepted, diving deeper into the complexities of law enforcement ethics and leadership. During her time at the National Academy, Ebony discovered a particular calling, rooting out systemic biases that eroded trust between officers and communities. She became a staunch advocate for accountability, believing that good policing and transparency were not mutually exclusive. That's also how she ended up on Maplewood's radar. Chief Marsh wanted a captain who could bring progressive reforms to a department rumored to have pockets of prejudice. Terry Cole's attack on her was a rude awakening, but also a stark affirmation of why she was there. If Maplewood PD was harboring officers who felt entitled to brutalize people, Ebony intended to put an end to it. Still, she couldn't help the pang of betrayal. It was her own uniform, the very badge she'd sworn to honor, that had harmed her. And now, as she stared at her reflection in the mirror across the room, she knew this fight was personal. A knock at her door snapped her back to the present. "Come in," she called, quickly sliding her blazer back on. Lieutenant Arlene Howe entered with a small stack of files. "Captain, these are some of the internal reports you requested use of, force incidents, citizen complaints, that sort of thing. Also, Sergeant Lee from Internal Affairs wants you to know they're gathering footage from the store where the incident happened." Ebony nodded gratefully. "Thank you, Lieutenant. How's the department taking the news?" Howe pursed her lips. "Reactions are mixed. Some officers are indifferent. Others are curious. There's a small faction that's upset about the idea of new reforms. Cole has a group of buddies who think he's being singled out. Ebony expected as much. I see. Well, we'll handle that as it comes. She took the files. I appreciate the update, Lieutenant. Once Howe left, Ebony dove into the files. The pattern was concerning. Complaints against Terry Cole ranged from verbal harassment to questionable use of force, especially in the North District. For years, it seemed, these complaints were investigated but rarely led to formal consequences. The explanations were vague lack of evidence, witnesses unwilling to testify, subject non-compliant. Ebony recognized the familiar pattern of a system that allowed officers like Cole to slip through the cracks. She leaned back in her chair, scanning more documents. In one instance, Cole had been accused of striking a handcuffed suspect during an arrest. Another complaint involved an elderly man who claimed Cole used racial slurs. There were also signs of nepotism. Cole's uncle was once a high-ranking officer in Maplewood PD, which might have shielded him from disciplinary action in the past. By the time Ebony finished reviewing these reports, dusk was settling outside. The station was quieter. Now, many officers had gone home. Ebony gathered her things, switched off the lights, and headed out. As she made her way to her car, she reflected on the enormity of what lay ahead. Reform wasn't just about one racist cop. It was about transforming a culture that had turned a blind eye. Meanwhile, across town, Terry Cole nursed a beer in a dimly lit bar. 4 other officers from the department surrounded him. The atmosphere was tense. Some offered words of support, others caution. "You gotta be careful," warned Officer Jim Rodriguez, who had joined him. "IA is serious this time. The new captain, she's not messing around." Terry glowered, fingers tightening around his glass. I know, but I can't believe she'd walk into a situation like that. Who does she think she is?" "She was interfering." A shorter officer named Clayton Mitchell snorted. "Come on, man." "You know that story won't hold. She wasn't interfering. She was just trying to help. The cameras probably caught everything." Terry slammed his glass down. "So what are you saying, Clay? That I'm screwed?" "No," Jim interjected. "But you need a lawyer. And you need to keep your head down." Terry clenched his jaw, anger and fear coiling in his gut. He remembered Ebony's face, the calm authority that made him feel small, something he was not used to feeling. He didn't like it. "I'm not going to just roll over," he muttered. "She wants to make an example out of me? I'll fight back." Officer Diana Spear, the only woman at the table besides Ebony's absent presence, sighed. "If you push too hard, you'll dig your own grave. The old guard can't protect you forever. Times are changing, especially with a new captain who's coming from Chicago with a mandate." Terry drained the last of his beer, ignoring her warning. He stood abruptly, grabbing his jacket. "I gotta go. I'll figure something out." He headed for the door, stepping out into the cool night air. A knot of tension sat in his chest. The conversation echoed in his mind, cameras, evidence, witnesses. Ebony Carter's unyielding resolve. He could try to spin a tale, claim Ebony was the aggressor, but he suspected that wouldn't stand. Still, admitting guilt was never in his DNA. As he drove home, he found himself steering aimlessly through Maplewood's dim streets. He passed through the North District, the scene of so many of his controversial stops. His headlights illuminated the worn apartment buildings and shuttered shops. Memories flickered, some of him handing out harsh words, others of him quietly letting a kid off with a warning. Moments of grace overshadowed by moments of brutality. He finally pulled into his driveway, parking in front of a modest suburban house. Terry lingered in the car, the engine idling. For the first time, he wondered if his worldview was indeed as toxic as Ebony's unwavering eyes had implied. Had he become a monster, or had he always been one? Guilt clashed with resentment. He killed the engine and stepped inside, the emptiness of his home echoing his turmoil. He tossed his keys onto the kitchen table and stared at his own reflection in the window. Could he outrun the past? Could he bury what he'd done in the grocery store? Time would tell. But Ebony Carter was no ordinary adversary. She was his commanding officer, armed with the power of truth, accountability, and the law. For Officer Terry Cole, it seemed the clock was finally ticking on the illusions he'd built around himself. The next few days rattled Maplewood to its core. Word spread quickly that Captain Ebony Carter had filed a use of force complaint against Officer Terry Cole. A local journalist, Adrienne Martin, picked up the story, printing a front-page article in the Maplewood Times, "New Captain Alleges Assault by Veteran Cop." The piece detailed Ebony's background with the Chicago PD and how she was swiftly taking action to ensure accountability in her new department. The community's response was divided. Some residents, especially those who had long felt marginalized or mistreated, saw Ebony as a beacon of hope, someone finally willing to address what they believed was systemic racism in the force. Others, more traditional in their views, felt she was attacking a good cop who was just doing his job. Terry had plenty of supporters who subscribed to the notion that Maplewood was safer because of his tough stance, even if it skirted the edges of acceptable conduct. Tension simmered like a pot about to boil over. Protesters gathered outside the police station. Some carried signs that read, "Justice for all and no place for racism." Across the street, a smaller group held signs saying, "Support our police and Captain Carter. Stop the witch hunt." The sight of Maplewood residents lining opposite sidewalks, chanting slogans, fueled an air of confrontation that the town had rarely experienced. Inside the station, Ebony focused on her mission. She convened a meeting with her lieutenants and sergeants to discuss new policies on accountability and community engagement. She introduced guidelines requiring body cameras to be turned on for every public interaction, mandatory de-escalation training, and a streamlined complaint process that involved a citizen review board. The senior staff reacted in various ways, some with enthusiasm, others with skepticism. But Ebony's stance was clear: change was coming. Meanwhile, Terry was placed on paid administrative leave pending the internal affairs investigation. He spent his days meeting with the police union lawyer, drafting statements, and trying to rally allies within the department. He phoned old friends, including some who held minor political offices, to see if they could apply pressure on Ebony or Chief Marsh. But Ebony had anticipated these maneuvers, carefully insulating the investigation from political interference. Every time Ebony walked through the station corridors, she felt eyes follow her, whispers behind her back. Some officers approached her with friendly greetings, thanking her for addressing issues they'd felt powerless to confront. Others gave her the cold shoulder, their loyalty to Cole unwavering. It was a microcosm of the town's broader split. Late one afternoon, Ebony ventured into the North District to observe a youth outreach program. She wanted to reassure the local community that the department was committed to serving them fairly. The program took place in a small community center next to a public park. Children played basketball on a worn-out court while a couple of off-duty officers supervised. Ebony noticed that the kids seemed hesitant around the uniformed police, shooting wary glances whenever the officers approached. She introduced herself to a few teenagers, striking up a conversation about their experiences in Maplewood. One young man, Marcus, confided that he'd had an encounter with Officer Cole a few months back. "He pulled me over while I was on my bike," Marcus said, voice trembling with anger. "Said I looked suspicious. Kept asking where I was going, if I had drugs. I was coming home from the library. He shoved me off my bike, said I was resisting. I was terrified." Ebony felt a wave of empathy and fury. "I'm sorry you went through that," she said gently. We're looking into all complaints against officers who may have overstepped. I want you to know I'm here to make things right, but I need your help. Are you willing to make a statement?" Marcus hesitated, eyes flickering with uncertainty. "I don't know," he said, glancing at the uniformed officers on the other side of the court. "I'm scared it'll come back on me." Ebony placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "I understand. It takes courage to speak up. But if we're going to change things, we need the truth on record." Marcus nodded slowly. "I'll think about it." As Ebony left the community center, she felt a swell of determination. Maplewood needed transformation, and it wouldn't be easy. She remembered her early days in Chicago, the skepticism she faced, and how slowly progress came, if at all. But this was her responsibility now. She thought of Terry likely at home, stewing in anger or plotting how to keep his job. Part of her wished he could see the harm he had done, not just to individuals but to the fabric of trust that held a community together. Another part of her steeled herself for the possibility that he wouldn't, that he would remain entrenched in denial until the end. Either way, Ebony would press forward. She had sworn an oath to serve and protect, and that promise extended to Maplewood's most vulnerable residents. If that meant weathering protests, enduring departmental strife, and standing up to Terry Cole and the old guard, then so be it. The wheels of change were in motion, and nothing, not fear, not tradition, not even deep-rooted prejudice would halt them now. The internal affairs investigation moved swiftly. Surveillance footage from the grocery store showed Terry aggressively shoving Ebony, who clearly had her hands raised in compliance. Multiple witnesses, store employees and bystanders, came forward to corroborate Ebony's account. Though IA followed protocol, it quickly became apparent that the evidence heavily favored Ebony's version of events. Sergeant Lee compiled the reports and delivered them to the department's disciplinary board, a committee composed of police leadership and a representative from the local community council. Chief Marsh oversaw the proceedings, but allowed Ebony to recuse herself from decision-making to avoid conflicts of interest, though she did provide testimony as a witness. On the day of the hearing, Ebony sat in the front row of the audience, maintaining her composure. Terry arrived in a crisp uniform, accompanied by his union lawyer. He looked defiant, chest puffed out, as though wearing the uniform itself could shield him from the consequences of his actions. The hearing commenced with Sergeant Lee laying out the evidence. The video footage played on a projector screen, silent except for the rustle of onlookers. It was damning. The committee saw Ebony stepping back calmly, only to be shoved into the shelf by Terry. The footage clearly refuted Terry's written statement, claiming Ebony was combative. Next came witness statements. The teenage cashier testified first, voice shaky but resolute. She tried to calm the angry customer. Then Officer Cole came in, told her to move, and she was moving, but he just pushed her. Another shopper corroborated the sequence. Even the angry customer, who'd eventually been charged for disorderly conduct, admitted that Ebony wasn't the problem. Terry had escalated the situation. Terry's lawyer attempted to undermine the witnesses, suggesting they were biased or that the camera angle didn't capture the entire incident. But the line of defense wavered under the weight of consistent, overlapping testimonies. When Ebony took the stand, she spoke firmly and professionally, detailing her perspective without bitterness. She clarified that she had complied with Terry's orders and was in the process of stepping away when he used force on her. The board members listened intently, their expressions growing more somber. Eventually, Terry was asked to testify. He walked to the podium, face set like stone. He argued that Ebony had inserted herself into a police matter. He claimed the grocery store was chaotic and that he had no choice but to act quickly to secure the scene. The board members pressed him on why Ebony posed a threat. He struggled to find a credible answer. "She wasn't wearing a uniform," Terry said, voice taut with anger. "I didn't know who she was." A female board member leaned forward. "But she wasn't resisting, correct?" Terry hesitated, then muttered, "She wasn't following my orders fast enough." Silence fell across the room. Even members of the public who had gathered for the hearing seemed taken aback by his admission. The friction between Ebony's calm compliance on the footage and Terry's words was impossible to ignore. The disciplinary board took a recess to deliberate. During the break, Terry paced the hallway outside, the union lawyer whispering agitated instructions. Ebony stood to the side, speaking quietly with Sergeant Lee. Though Ebony had done everything by the book, a flicker of anxiety twisted in her gut. She knew how departmental politics could sometimes warp outcomes. After an hour, the board reconvened. Chief Marsh read their decision. Officer Terry Cole was found to have violated multiple department policies, including use of excessive force and conduct unbecoming of an officer. The recommended penalty was immediate termination from the Maplewood Police Department. Gasps echoed through the room. Some of Terry's supporters shook their heads in disbelief, while others sat in stunned silence. Terry's face went pale. He started to speak, but the lawyer gripped his arm, cautioning him to remain silent. Chief Marsh continued, "Additionally, we are forwarding this case to the District Attorney's Office for possible criminal charges. Officer Cole has the right to appeal, but effective immediately, he is stripped of his badge and service weapon." An undercurrent of tension coursed through the room. Ebony took a measured breath, feeling a mix of relief and sorrow. She didn't revel in another officer's downfall, but accountability was paramount. Terry Cole's brutality had been exposed for all to see, and Maplewood PD had finally taken a decisive stand against it. Terry stormed out, ignoring the hush that fell over the station. Outside, reporters clustered, cameras flashing. He swatted them away, shouting, "I have nothing to say," as he shouldered past. Ebony watched from a distance, her mind replaying the memories of that day in the grocery store. She thought of all the people who'd suffered because of his actions, like young Marcus on his bike. For them, this moment of accountability wasn't just about punishing a single officer. It was a step toward healing a broken system. In the weeks following Terry's termination, Maplewood PD embarked on a journey of reform. True to her word, Captain Ebony Carter began implementing changes designed to rebuild community trust and promote transparency within the department. She started by requiring every officer to undergo refresher training in de-escalation tactics and cultural sensitivity. Even seasoned veterans had to attend, sparking some grumbling, but Ebony insisted that no one was exempt. The environment in the station gradually shifted. The more open-minded officers embraced the reforms, relieved that the department was finally acknowledging long-standing issues. Others were hesitant, worried about stricter oversight and the potential for unfair scrutiny. But the days of sweeping complaints under the rug had passed. A newly formed community advisory board began meeting regularly with Ebony and key department leaders. Residents who had once viewed the police with suspicion attended these sessions to voice their concerns. Ebony personally oversaw the creation of a more straightforward complaint process, ensuring that any allegation against an officer would be investigated promptly and thoroughly. Maplewood PD also expanded its community outreach, hosting events like Coffee with a Cop and educational workshops for local youth. Meanwhile, Terry's appeal of his termination worked its way through the legal system. Public sentiment was split, with some demanding he face criminal charges for assault, and others insisting he was a scapegoat for deeper departmental issues. The district attorney did file charges of misdemeanor battery, but the case was still pending. Terry made sporadic appearances in the local news, always denying any wrongdoing. Yet the video footage of him striking Ebony remained a powerful piece of evidence that was hard to refute. During this period, Ebony took time to build relationships within the department, meeting one-on-one with every officer. She listened to their stories, concerns, and aspirations. Some officers confessed their discomfort with the old ways, admitting they'd never felt safe speaking up before. Others openly opposed her reforms, but Ebony approached them with patience, explaining why changes were necessary and how they benefited not just the community, but the officers themselves. One morning, as Ebony was heading to her office, she was stopped by Officer Diana Spear, a reserved woman in her late 20s. Diana had witnessed Terry's meltdown at the bar. She hesitated, then said quietly, "Captain, I just wanted to say, I appreciate what you're doing. Not everybody might say it openly, but you've given some of us hope that Maplewood PD can be a place we're proud to serve." Ebony smiled warmly. "Thank you, officer. That means a lot." At times, Ebony found herself thinking about Terry. She'd heard rumors he was spiraling into bitterness and self-pity. Part of her wished he would seek help, confront his issues, and maybe one day find a path to redemption. Yet, she recognized it wasn't her responsibility to fix him, nor should she dwell on it. Her focus remained on ensuring no one else in Maplewood would suffer the kind of abuse she'd experienced at his hands. Then came a surprising development. Ebony received word that Marcus, the teenager from the North District who'd been harassed by Terry, had decided to file a formal complaint. Chief Marsh and Ebony met with him and his mother in a conference room at the station. Marcus's voice trembled as he described the harrowing encounter, how Terry had knocked him off his bike and called him a troublemaker. His mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, thanking Ebony for creating a climate where they felt safe coming forward. Ebony's heart swelled with a mix of compassion and resolve. This was why she'd come to Maplewood, to ensure stories like Marcus's were heard and addressed. She assured them that the department would fully investigate the claim and strive for a just outcome. As they left, Ebony caught Chief Marsh's eye, and he gave a slight nod, an unspoken recognition that progress was indeed being made. Over time, Maplewood streets felt different. There were fewer stories of racially biased stops, fewer confrontations that ended in violence. Where fear had once reigned, a cautious optimism emerged. Ebony never claimed all problems were solved. Systemic change was a marathon, not a sprint, but the foundation was being laid. Several months later, a small ceremony was held in front of the station to commemorate new beginnings. The Maplewood Times covered the event, highlighting Ebony's leadership and the tangible improvements in police-community relations. People who once shunned the department came to show their support, standing shoulder to shoulder with officers they now saw as protectors rather than aggressors. Ebony stood at the podium, her new uniform crisp and badge gleaming in the autumn sunlight. As she spoke, she thought of the day she'd been assaulted by Terry Cole, the day her rank and her very presence were challenged in the most brutal way. Now, standing here, she realized how far the town had come in such a short period. "We are committed to serving Maplewood with integrity, compassion, and fairness," she said, voice carrying through the crowd. "This is just the beginning. We will continue to work, to listen, and to grow, because that's what this community deserves." The crowd applauded, and Ebony felt a surge of pride. She remembered Chicago, the FBI, National Academy, and the struggles that had shaped her. She thought of all the obstacles that remained, yet in that moment she knew Maplewood was on the right path. And though she would never forget the sting of Terry Cole's assault, she took solace in the knowledge that true justice had finally arrived, and that her presence here was helping spark a transformation that might, one day, make Maplewood a model for other cities to follow. Thank you for watching this dramatic tale of justice, redemption, and the power of truth. In our story, a corrupt cop learned the hard way that abusing one's badge comes with real consequences, especially when the person you victimize turns out to be your new boss. We followed Captain Ebony Carter as she turned her own traumatic experience into the catalyst for vital change within her department, showing us that perseverance and integrity can triumph over prejudice. If you found yourself cheering for Ebony and want to see more powerful stories like this one, be sure to hit that like button and share this video with your friends. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue creating content that highlights the triumph of justice and humanity. Together, let's keep these important conversations alive and work toward a world where everyone is treated with dignity and respect.